And I'm just curious about how your group moved from that question, or how you see what the relationship between what you actually did to the initial question, and what processes did you go through to make that change?
Yeah, so we definitely saw that art can be used as a marketing approach to publicize things. And going off of the original question of how we can influence and educate developers and politicians, you know, we came to the conclusion that murals and visual displays can be used as satires and humors, and that can send an effective message about what is wrong with what developers are doing, and how it'll send a message to them to see what they are doing, what is wrong.
Also, part of the idea of the weekly events is that the politicians would be invited to every event, so eventually they would feel pressured to come into the neighborhood, because otherwise they would be advertised badly.
And if I remember correctly, the first of the sub-questions dealt with trying to put pressure on politicians and developers in that regard.
Yes, Hanka?
In some of the background readings we did, it was mentioned that art is often also the source of gentrification. So as communities have more festivals and have more art events, they actually gentrification grows. Did you perhaps think of what role that might play in your project, as there's more thriving art community, that perhaps that plays into the hands of developers?
So we thought about that a little. We were thinking more like, a lot of the time when that happens, it's the developers leading that movement, being like, look, it's a new art district. But we really wanted to focus on it being the community members and the artists, like, moving the community along, rather than having the developers input.
Yeah, and I think that kind of ties back to our point about like publicizing the bad decisions that developers might make, or like the bad decisions that politicians might make. So like just really making sure that it's known that they are kind of encroaching on a culture and on a neighborhood when it's really not their place to do that. So I think that's kind of like we kind of talked a little bit about just how we can utilize that publicizing aspect to our benefit, basically.
So, Jean and Katie, who are kind of connected to, community development corporations anyway, I'm just wondering how this is landing for you in terms of, just what your response is to this idea.
I think it's a great idea. I would say both. I mean, going back to the first presentation, I think the idea of improv in terms of disseminating information, I thought it was very cleverly done for our class, but also I had mentioned to Genevieve, right, that I thought, wait, hey, why don't you get these students to do some improv work in your workshops so that the tenants can learn what can happen. And with this, I think art can be a very powerful mechanism to portray messages. Unfortunately, in my experience, both from a finance side and from building affordable housing, I know developers are motivated by one thing and one thing only. It tends to be, it has little presidents on it, green dollar bills, and so unfortunately I think the message of this needs to be very heavily rooted to the politicians and decision makers, because they control exactly how much dollars the developers can get out of various projects. But making it visual and getting it out there that this is a culture and you don't want to let it go, it's a form of pressure on the politicians as to what's happening in the community that can be sacrificed as part of this gentrification.
Yes.
Yeah, I think what I see in our city is that this type of format will help us to have some way of communicate with the city council, because they are at the end are the ones that approve these developments to happen, and they don't take it serious. They don't even understand what they are approving. They just know that they want to make their city bigger and brighter and more modern and whatever it is. But they are not considering what is going on, like what we saw here, a child crying. That's what we see every day. And the people that come to my meetings, they are with children crying in the other room, afraid, and I have someone that is talking to them, saying, you know, your mom is here or your dad is here because we are trying to find a new home for you because, you know, that home was old. And we do that every single week. So this is more, I think, for our leaders than to the tenants in our community.
I would just say, I think, okay, thank you for bringing that point up because I think that is really important. There is a really interesting relationship with artists and gentrification, and I think it's a relationship that that as community organizers, you know, you need to be very, very conscious of and very intentional in your actions. I think that these celebrations of the community could be really impactful if that intentionality is really put to highlighting why, you know, what it is that you're celebrating about the community and why that might not be there in a few years, or what is it that makes, you know, that community something that you want to celebrate so regularly and that brings people into these celebrations, and really kind of formulate that as something that you need to protect. And I think the point of bringing policymakers into the mix is a good one, and it's great that you all brought that up, because I think at least, like, you know, a lot of policymakers get money from developers, so, you know, you're kind of combating that, and you need to, as the community that's voting for those people, you know, you have a lot of power in that, and so kind of holding them accountable and making sure that they, you know the faces of the people and as their constituents, and that can be a really powerful relationship. But I do think you need to be very intentional and deliberate on like what you're highlighting and how you highlight it.
I just want to ask you to make a note for the final report that there's a new research from the NEA about the effects of artists on gentrification. The key finding was that the commercial arts tend to contribute to gentrification, whereas more fine arts in neighborhoods actually don't. So we can be somewhat nuanced when we write up the final report. Winty?
One thing that sometimes works rather difficult in the community work is artists are trained to be complex, and the more complexity there is, usually in the fine arts, there's more credit you get, whereas community ideas have to be very simple. So by using the art, you have to be very careful of the agency that the people are. I mean, that mural shows that a little bit of that indication. People have a tendency to draw very small. People, whereas artists just want a very simple message. So if you want to control the message, you have to be very clear of what that message is and tell the artist how to present it in the most simple way. I think the idea of using every week the same festivities, by using, and you can add on to it every time there is something, like, you know, either using some form of community art form, whatever form, but always repeat it and add more and more every week onto it. Then people have this idea that they are coming for fun of it, and not to be. And you have to plan it in such a way so that it's very broad for the whole city, and not for the media is what you need to know. It's not for people drawing small things, and have people participate in it in such a way that they feel that they are part of it, but it's actually, you planned it out very, very well so that there's a very broad image being presented. I think that would be very important.
Interesting. Krista?
I wondered, in your conversations, when you're thinking about forming committees, it sounds like there's a little bit of combativeness that you're presenting in terms of, like, this is our neighborhood, you developers are over here. in the conversations, did you consider the role of developers on those committees in terms of even choosing artists or choosing the festivals and participating and developing something like that together so they understand and get to know what exists creatively in that neighborhood?
Yeah, we were thinking the committees more as like they're responsible for this, but it's a very mixed box of people basically. So if it's teacher committee, maybe there are some developers there, but it's focused on that aspect itself of the school.
Great, okay, thank you. Okay, we're on to group 3. And this group started out with an idea that although housing issues need to be addressed at the neighborhood level, there's clearly something going on nationally and actually even globally around housing. And one of the studies that we read indicates that in no county in the United States can people earn a minimum wage and afford to rent a house that would be suitable for their families. So this group was all about transforming consciousness around housing to the notion that housing is actually a human right. And I will leave it to you all.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna start with actually a little visualization, somewhat of a guided meditation, though I only have a couple minutes, so it won't quite be that, but if you can all just kind of gently close your eyes. And we'll start by holding one hand on your chest and your other hand open on your belly. And so we really want to start by turning attention to your breath. So with your hands here, really feeling your hands rise and fall with each breath of air. And your breath can start to get a little bit longer. And start to imagine a soft glow that you drink in as you inhale. The glow grows throughout your body and you can feel it warm you from the inside. And as you breathe out, you also expel any weight that you might be holding, any tension that might be carried in your shoulders or your forehead, and let it just melt into the floor. And I want you to turn your focus to the space between your eyes on your forehead. Allow yourselves to see things differently through this eye. And I'd like you to think about home. Think about what home means to you. It might be a physical structure, it might be a person or a collection of people. It might be a food or a sound or a smell. Whatever home means to you, take notice and acknowledge the role it's played in your life. What is it that makes this your home? Has anyone shared this space with you? Who else might call this home? And as you're in this space, that home, I want you to turn your attention to a window off in the distance. And as you focus in on that window, suddenly you realize you're on the outside looking in. You're looking into your home and you're starting to feel somewhat disconnected from that image of home. You're now only an observer of the space that you hold dear. You can see that space, but only from a distance, as if it was a movie or something from the past. You see others within your home enjoying the peace and the calm that you once did. How does this feel? The access of our homes can be a precondition for things like work, security, education, and health. We all make judgments as human beings, but it is what we do with those judgments that matters. When we empathize with someone, we see ourselves within them. Empathy is a beautiful thing, but it's not complete if it doesn't include everyone. Our empathy often has exceptions, some that we might be aware of or some that we're not. And these exceptions often include people that we don't see, people that we don't see ourselves within. Work on developing your empathy to include everyone, realizing that you are one important but small piece in a greater whole. Our best selves relies on the connectivity of all of us, the unique gifts that we each bring that makes our humanity complete. I want you to turn your attention back to your breathing. Again, feeling the rise and fall in the palms of your hands. And when you're ready, you can blink your eyes open. And thank you all so much for participating. I know that that may have been a little intense, so if you want to talk to me about that later.
Welcome, esteemed members of the community. Thank you for coming to our presentation. Some of you may be community organizers, religious leaders, local politicians, and artists. Others of you, local residents, small business owners, or students. Whatever your position in our community may be, we would like to present an idea to you, an idea that can be shaped and modeled by you for your community. Victoria, Kate, and I, cultural workers at Brandeis University, would like to advocate for housing as a human right by accurately depicting the humanity and value of those impacted by gentrification. The signs of gentrification are all around you. That new hipster coffee shop, the park down the street that was once a housing complex, empty buildings, and new developments. Our hope is to draw attention to these spaces through a visual media campaign, commenting on the misappropriation of space and the value of community by using the voices and art of those being directly affected by gentrification. Imagine walking down the street to your new favorite hipster coffee shop and being confronted with an image painted on the building showing the faces of those displaced from the area. Through this reframing of gentrification in the public eye, we aim to shift the perspective of those ignorant or unsympathetic to the effects of gentrification and alter the public's consciousness about housing as a human right. We would like to ask you to think of Schiffman as your community and to think about how this community would be altered when the voices of its members are silenced and displaced. So we have a little walking tour for you. You can follow our orange line to your destinations through Schiffman. Let's go.
Thank you.
Pick up the rear.
I think we're coming back.
Yeah, I think we're coming back. I was hoping. I have no idea.
Go ahead. That was very creative. How are you? Nice to see you.
Okay, here we are. Oh. Thank you for joining us. It was maybe a little bit, I don't know, bothering to walk, but we have this idea, and we took it from the Freedom Trail with the idea of reuse an important symbol that is already installed in the community. That's why the line. And the hard part that makes it pretty much impossible is to go from the idea of housing as a human right to reality. So what we kept in mind all the time was how to empower community in order to install this idea in the political agenda, because we think that only working with the idea within the community, but not thinking about how to place it as a public policy, different public policy, wouldn't make sense. So here we have our campaign goals that may apply to different campaign or different actions. Do you want to read them? Sure. So the first one is to offer a platform to empower the community in the claim that housing is a human right. So in this, in the empowerment of the community, we really mean that we suggest that you include as many diverse stories and perspectives about the assets and the needs of your community in order to kind of make sure that you're avoiding the danger of a single story and reflecting the community as those that live there, would want to see it reflected. And in this case, I like to add that we are aware that our time is the resource that is that we lack the most, and reality go faster, much faster than the time that requires to organize. So thinking about that. And thinking about empower community, we think that before taking any step forward, we should take a moment to really map those actors and communities that we are already engaged in order to think this platform in a broader way.
Yeah, so we were thinking in the creation of something like what we did upstairs, those landmarks that are picked would be reflective of the stories that you're gathering from the community. So this really ought to be a community-led process, which is part of why we tried to have some of the quotes, kind of wanting that first-hand narrative.
Okay. Build empathy, demonstrate how it might feel to be displaced. That is something that everybody has been talking already.
Utilize the platform to elevate the problem within political agenda, avoid isolated actions, a coordinated effort to include both time and space. That's what I just said. And use resources creatively. That's what we try to do. Connections and symbols that highlight or add new meaning.
Yeah, so I think this touches on the point, I believe the last group made this point, that if you can demonstrate something in kind of a myriad of ways, then you're able to touch different people. This might resonate with someone, but perhaps, a community celebration festival might resonate more with other people. So trying to use as many different strategies as possible so that you're reaching as many groups of people as possible. And also, I think the established symbols, those are places or things that already carry meaning. And so if you can highlight kind of maybe why that meaning exists or how that meaning might differ for different people, that was something, again, we tried to do with the demonstration upstairs.
Okay. So our recommendations are to be realistic and find an idea that is easy to manage and is accessible to all different stakeholders, so holding many different perspectives. And something that we talked about a lot was we know who is against us, but it's important to identify like our allies and people who are really involved in the effects of gentrification on a community, and people who would be able to take our idea and move it to a broader platform or globalize it more.
Yeah, I think, in trying to bring these kinds of installations to people, it forces people to face something that they might otherwise not be thinking about or not have to think about. And I guess our hope with that, bringing this kind of conversation to people and to different people, is that it can be seen as more of a wider scale issue. So spanning it beyond just, one neighborhood or one city or one state. That kind of shift in thinking.
Then do not assume, make space for different options and perspectives. Change may not be as bad as it appears if you have the chance to choose. And that we relate that directly to the concept of human rights, because we assume that it's not going to be one only solution for this huge global problem. But one important aspect is to have the chance to choose, to move, do not move, and where to move and why to move. But so it means that it requires a really, really complex set of solutions.
Which is, touching on that next piece, different people want different things, so the answer should be complex, really embracing the nuances, and then considering history and circularity. Do you want to explain?
Yeah, in the sense that we have this reality now, all these people moving to the cities, but it may happen that in 10 years, cities will be or not as representative as people expected, or are going to be a mess, so people could move back away. These things happen in history, and maybe could be a strategy to convince people not to move, or at least a part of the people that are moving to the cities to not to move, because if you move to the city because you are looking for diversity, but all people move to the city, then diversity is not going to be there anymore.
And this was just kind of a lasting thought we wanted to leave you with. So home and housing is so much more than just a physical structure.
it impacts people in so many other ways, whether it's, you know, the jobs that people can get, the education that your children can get, the access to healthcare that you may or may not have. It has so many other implications. And so, you know, that's kind of where we see the tie-in with human rights, is it really kind of impacts all these other pieces of your life that kind of allow opportunity and agency and self-sufficiency.
Great,
That's
thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
So, we have time for questions,
I
suggestions.
actually just wanted to add one more thing that
Yes.
we didn't include in our presentation.
Sorry.
Something that we talked about a lot is how this project can be used in many different spaces, not just cities, but places outside of cities that aren't really being directly impacted by gentrification. It's all about changing perspective and shifting consciousness, which is why we wanted to have it be based in Schiffman when we showed it to you all, to show that it can be in different places using the same concepts and communicating the same message to different people.
It's like a toolkit that we can almost maybe give to other kind of community organizers and leaders. That's the idea.
In listening to this presentation, I was struck by one of John Paul Lederach's ideas that, you know, the simplicity on the far side of complexity is really helpful for any kind of peace building. Like, simplicity without an examination of the complexity is likely to be quite useless. But after you've examined and understood the dynamics and then can find a simple way of expressing those things that really resonate for people, that can be really important. So I was just thinking about your comment, Wenty, about simplicity. Yes, we can't do, you know, too complex presentation and have it be effective to motivate action. But if it's simplicity without that thought behind it, it can be very destructive.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we're open for questions, suggestions, ideas. Yes, Anna.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the visuals that were upstairs and sort of what your intention was.
I'll talk about that. So we came to Schiffman and we took a bunch of pictures of the outside and inside and students and empty classrooms. And we were kind of thinking about communities and the communities that can exist in Schiffman, especially like at Brandeis and educational communities, and how those communities can be changed or lose their value when the community members are silenced or displaced. So the first image that we all came up with was the empty classroom with all the pretty plants and flowers in it. And that kind of represents when a housing complex is destroyed and then a park is put there and it's pretty and it's nice to look at, but it can't be utilized by the community members who were displaced because of it. So that classroom with the plants in it is kind of showing how there are spaces that can be utilized, but they're being used for aesthetic purposes and not really helping the community. And the image with the student with all the bugs around him was kind of to show how even if community members are still part of a community, they can be affected by gentrification, and symbolizing why a community member would want to leave the community and why that space would be hard for them to be in, and they would feel undervalued and attacked by the bugs. And then the final image of Schiffman with all the fruit piled up is meant to show how things that can be utilized, like food and resources, are not, and how things that should be part of a community and help a community can be an obstacle for a community and can be a barrier between members of the community and the access and resources that they need.
One thing I would just say too that I found really interesting, so in addition to the photos that we took, we interviewed students that were kind of hanging out. You probably saw some of the quotes, but interviewed some students that were hanging out in the building. And yesterday, one of the women that we interviewed was talking about that lecture hall and how much she loved that space because it was a space that they had music and they had different events, but it was still this nice intimate space. And she went on for a while talking about how much she loved that room. And I just felt like that was, getting that quote was such a perfect combination for this project with Zoe's picture where she put in all those plants everywhere. Because it shows that sometimes you don't realize what spaces are so important to people. You don't realize the value that spaces, carry within various individuals in the community. And so it might be easy to say, oh yeah, this would look great with a park here so we could have some flowers to look at, but you don't always know what it is you're destroying.
Questions? Yes, Helga.
My question's almost perhaps not to the group, but to the groups that presented. And how do you see your project aligning with the others? And how? Because I feel like there's quite a lot of similarity, but maybe you have had some thoughts on that.
Well, I think that our project, because the way that we've envisioned it is so accessible and kind of like easy to put together. I think that it could be used in any space alongside any other kinds of like community building initiatives, like working with them or just on its own.
The thing is that it needs to be thought like really related with what already exists. I mean, what the spaces that you have, the time from politics. It's not like the campaign, this and other ideas that we discussed all are related with previous stuff, because otherwise it could play like the opposite role, like to look like something kind of stupid or something like that, and just make fun about human rights. So we thought about actions that could amplify what you need to amplify, like, okay, political agenda, okay, this thing that is happening in this community that is also happening in this other community. So I think that all may relate in the not only on how they look, but also on the ideas that they are based on.
I guess I also see this example as something that if you were to really kind of put it in its full expression into a community, you could tie in those other pieces that constitute human rights and kind of put those things together so that maybe they can be seen more as a package. That was a little bit difficult to do with our time constraints and our space constraints, but I think that in the community setting, that might be something that you could do a little bit more.
Dan?
Yeah, so the example that you mentioned about the Schiffman room is really resonating with me. I think it feels like it crystallizes an issue that you've talked a lot about, I think, really well. That, like, from a sort of campus facilities perspective, I don't think anybody would say that that's a particularly great room. But the fact that somebody loves it is all about what's happening there. It's all about the activity. And in a way, that means it's all about the community, because it's the community, the different aspects of the community that are bringing that activity to that place. So it's some set of circumstances that make it kind of a center of gravity and an important place for people. And so this business of the right to choose, I mean, I'm really, I'm thinking about some of the examples we heard about where, a developer comes in says, well, I'll give you $1 million to like sell your, what's really an apartment in bad condition because they think that they can turn it into high-end condos and make all kinds of money. And they say, I'll give you the money and you can get some other room that's just like the Schiffman room. You can get it somewhere else, further out of the city, on the periphery. But it's not really, it's not about the room. And so you could say, well, does that person really have the ability to not choose to take $1 million? Well, it depends on so many other factors, right? About all the needs and the pressures that the person's under in their life and their family. So, they may not feel like they have a right to choose. And some people have the luxury of having the right to choose, and there was the example of the woman who said, I'm here, years later, somebody came back and this woman's still here. Why is she still here? I'm here because I chose to stay. Well, that's great, and some people can do that, but people who feel like they're sort of forced to choose to leave, it really is a way to destroy a community. Because when they go to the new Schiffman room that maybe they're able to buy somewhere else, the thing that's important about it is missing. So, thinking of housing sort of in isolation as a human right, I just think it's so important. And I do think you emphasize this really well, that it's not just about some physical structure. Like, it's not the physical structure that you have a right to. It's the right to be in a neighborhood and be in a community. And I think you did a great job of talking about, and so did Group 2, I think, of promoting an appreciation of the value of the neighborhood, because the more people appreciate that, the more, not to say that all the developers will line up in support of this, but I think that the more support there can be for the idea that there is a value to preserving this community that exists here. And not to say that there wouldn't be changes and strengthening of the community in some ways, and maybe some changes that some people might think are undesirable too, because I don't think it's going to be one or the other. But the idea is, how can you not destroy that community? So I think keeping that in mind, that when we say housing, we're really not just talking about that, we'll make sure that you have a physical structure somewhere.
And I think that's why it was important to us to use found spaces in the community and build from that, because just like I said in my introduction, if you're walking down the same street you walk down every day and then suddenly there's a piece of art there that's drawing attention to the space that you walk past every day, it just kind of reinforces the value of the space and then the people who have created the art from the community.
Yes.
I just wanted to follow up on what I was saying. I think that's really interesting, because in some ways, I think it's interesting to use the whole idea of housing as a human right, because that kind of resonates with all of us. But in fact, if you look at something like the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, they would recognize that humans have a right to shelter or housing, but not to a home. And human rights don't guarantee us, all the sort of international covenants and conventions don't guarantee humans things that to a lot of us are the most important. There's no human right to be loved. There's no human right to be able to have a family. It might protect your family, but it wouldn't give you a family. So in some ways, the human rights paradigm is really different to what you're saying, which is that people want to have their home, not shelter and not housing.
Some of this idea builds off of this social psychiatrist, Mindy Falilov, that we read, who did extensive research into the effects of repeated dislocation, particularly on members of African American communities in this country over the last 6 decades, 8 decades maybe. And I mean, the very specific health effects in terms of life expectancy and suicide rates are markedly different and can be, in some cases, attributed to repeated moves. And so maybe we haven't recognized a home in a neighborhood as a human right, but maybe it's part of what is the right to health and to life. I mean, just that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So we have a few more minutes, and I wanted to give the space especially to the guests who are here to share their perspectives. Maybe you guys can sit down, and this could be on all of the different presentations. So Reverend Brown, Genevieve, Michael, Jean, Wen-T, Will, Dan. So there's a number of people to speak, and we don't have too much time, but I really value hearing your reflections and thoughts and questions for me.
Let me start by saying thank you to this class, because I can see that there is people that they understand the need to have a more social justice in our community, especially when it is housing. Housing is probably, it's not like you said, it's a human right to have shelter, but without shelter we are nothing. We cannot walk, we cannot entertain, we cannot help our children grow, we cannot age well, we cannot do anything. We cannot go to work because we don't know where are we going next time, to be next time. So thank you for your efforts, because the fight for affordable housing is a very lonely fight, and it's scary at times when you see so many people in front of you with the same problem. But being here, I feel that I am not alone, and that's very good. Thank you.
Thank you. No pressure.
I came in late, so I missed the first one, and I might have missed other things, but I found a lot of the discussion very abstract, which is funny because I think of art as so concrete. So I appreciated when actual art, either the trip through Schiffman and the visuals or this were done, because it gave me something to hold on to. But I continued, a lot of what was talked about was the use of art to convey messages. But part of the power of art is that it doesn't necessarily contain a message. That is, its level of contact and effect is nonverbal and non-conceptual. And some of the most famous cases of the power of art, whether you're talking about the riot that the Rite of Spring provoked in 1918, or those are all aesthetic social situations. Or I'm thinking of the case of, there was a mural, was it in South Boston? It was sort of a guerrilla mural that someone started putting up. It just appeared, and then people started adding to it, and some people started taking away from it. And at no point did anyone try to articulate a message to it. It was really a case of aesthetic collaboration on something, until something beautiful had been created together, and no one knew how or why. Anyway, so that the difference is between the nonverbal and the nonverbal and aesthetic, and the sort of more conceptual emphases that I heard from the presentation struck me.
Thanks.
So I appreciated all three of the presentations, and I want to thank all of you for the work and the effort that you put into it. And I appreciate all the comments, and I took notes, and so thank you for filling up my book. But I'm also struck by the notion of housing, not so much as a human right, but people have a right to a home and versus a housing structure. And it reminded me of a quote from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who talked about the civil rights laws, and somebody made a remark about, well, now that we have the laws, we're turning a corner. And his response to that was, well, the laws are created so that, you can't kill me, but the laws can't teach you to love me. And so, you know, people want a home, and people, when you look at housing projects, for example, they feel like they could change these structures, but they don't have any communication with the residents who see it as a home, and that they want that preserved. Next week I'm going to Chicago to work with a housing structure that had been raised, and then they put a new housing structure on top of it that was mixed use, and they're wondering why it's not working, and it's because they had zero input from the residents who saw them as you destroyed our home, and now you just want us to forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you all, you know, for all of this.
Well, my brain is just buzzing. I get very excited when I come to these classes. I'm so excited by all the ideas and the effort and energy that you all put into this work. I don't think I had that level of, I don't know, maturity at your age and everything. I really appreciate everything that you're doing. And I'm just going to share that there's a tiny little project that in my neighborhood, I was describing it to somebody. It was a beautiful little candy shop that was 100 years old, and it served all the neighborhood kids. And a 100-year-old woman, Ethel, used to run it, and she would give little sweets and a little school supplies. And she had some of the school supplies from like the 60s and the 70s. They were still there, you know. And everybody went there, and it was a lovely place for the kids to meet. And it just got torn down, and not torn down, the building's actually there, and they turned it into luxury condo. And so I want to start, like, you know, those little libraries, those little tiny little house libraries, but I want to do like a candy school supply shop. So if anybody wants to do something like that with me, let me know. I just really want to appreciate her memory. Anyway, you guys got me thinking, and I really am grateful to be here. Thank you.
Let's see, first of all, I would say I love being in the class. I love your student energy, and it gives me hope for the future because, you know, the world's kind of a tough place right now. So thank you for that antidote and energy. I think the system is very tough because the world is set up, for example, what's going on with Boston with all of the units, the luxury condos that are being built. Politicians appreciate the tax rolls that are coming out of it, so the system is working against gentrification in many ways, or in terms of blocking gentrification. So it is only through, you cannot count on the system taking care of it because the system is actually working against trying to keep things in place. So therefore, the energy and ideas and political pressure becomes incredibly important because otherwise, left to its own devices, I think the system would move towards more and more units and more displacement. Back to my original comment about it gives me hope and energy because I love the fact that you care so much, and I'm counting on you all to go out in the world and go forth with your thoughts and actions.
Wendy, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you with all the energy that's going on, and every presentation I think has a lot in it. But to make it briefer, I was particularly struck that it's human rights. If we look at it from that point of view and keep it in mind that is what is necessary for us to combat gentrification, it's not change that we are afraid of. It's the change of having the power taken away from us of the home and everything. So that if we have that fundamental idea that it's a human right to have a home, the home can be beautiful or it can be, a slum. So the beautiful home is so much better. But it doesn't have to be for profit. It can be just, we can create a beautiful home with a beautiful new building, but it is for the people to use as the best place to be. I think that's the fundamental question, I think. So.
Thanks.
I'm happy to be here and to learn from you all. And I find myself I find myself lately thinking a lot about what it means to be a community and to do community work. And I like your definition that you brought up about stakeholders. And I think community is inclusive of who we may think the enemy is. And who these stakeholders are. So I found myself in each of these presentations thinking about who really are the supporters in the community, who are those likely to oppose in the community, and where is the power of influence, and what pressures might help them shift their consciousness to have that empathy for the other people in the community. So not for the sake of you're on my side or you're against my side, but how can we create environments where people feel the incentive to see through someone else's lens? And I think you guys presented some interesting ways to think about that and some practical ways of dealing with that. And I too hope that this, you know, like, we need as much of this energy out in the world as humanly possible. So I feel positive being in this sort of creative thinking space, that we're not alone doing this work. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I wanted to add to what you were saying, Will, which really touches on an issue that I feel is so fundamental, and we talked about it a little bit last week in the group that I had a chance to participate in, and it's so basic, it's so fundamental. I feel like I think I asked the question last week. I said, if you asked some of these people, whether it's the people who are taking advantage of gentrification, there are people who are driving gentrification, if you ask them what the value is of having a profoundly diverse community, I feel like they wouldn't know what to say. They wouldn't have an answer. And I feel like there's like a fundamental, it's as if this very basic thing that, clearly some people know about. I mean, you read the book Urban Alchemy and it's like no mystery, it's like you get it. But it's, I feel like there's this fundamental sort of suppression of the ability to understand the value of having a profoundly diverse community. And so I feel like that there's a fundamental project of education about that needs to go on. And I think that it can. I think it's it strikes me as a potentially, something that could contribute to the conversation around this and to the work around this. But I really feel like it almost feels sort of elite, like the people who really understand that. And maybe that's not fair, but I feel like it's really limited, and that vast segments of, let's just say the U.S. population, to keep it really limited, just like the question would be sort of like, what are you talking about? I want to live in my gated community, because it's safe. I want to keep everyone safe. And that's the perspective. And there are all these factors that lead people to have that mentality. So I feel like, where is the counterposing educational program about appreciating how your life is better if you live in a diverse community, and how your mind is broadened, and you're safer, everything's better in that world. So I just think it's like fundamental to everything we're talking about.
In a way, that links back with Michael's question, because it's not necessarily through the message being delivered by art, although that can be very powerful and effective, but by the experience of making and appreciating art together in the kinds of festivals that people here we're talking about, or the community center, that does communicate, I think, to people, or allows them to experience the value of being in a diverse community. I think when we write up our report, I want to just like think through that question in relation to these different projects, because I think it's very important that we not limit the effectiveness of art to its message making, although I can understand why people landed in that direction, given the assignment, this particular assignment.
Stacey, can I just add one thing?
Yes.
May I just? So, one of the things I really liked about the group 2 presentation was this business that it's very multi-pronged, because it wasn't that like all art has to have a message. It was that different people are going to reach a better place in this respect in very different ways.
Yeah.
And so you need to kind of address that whole spectrum. So for some people, it might be like the Banksy mural that has a message. It's like, it's complex, but it's pretty clear. But it also might be just the experience, as you say, of like bonding with people over doing something wonderful, listening to music or looking at art, whatever it is. So it's all of those. It's not an either-or situation. It's about having that richness of activity.
Yeah. I just want to say, Stacey, I realized I didn't ask you if you wanted to make comments. I apologize. I think I just embraced you into the class. But would you have anything you'd like to add?
I enjoyed the presentations, and thank you. And I thought it was interesting placing the walkthrough project in the Hinge movement. It sort of makes one think about what you consider home, not just the place where you lay your head, but where you learn every day, or work every day, or study every day, where you develop community. So in that sense, the definition of home can be pretty broad, because it's where you build connections, whatever those connections may be. I think thinking about how an artistic approach to preserving that identity can be effective if it's just one way to look at it. And I think it was sort of consciousness inducing.
Great, thank you. I'm going to, I think, wrap this up by just saying that, this is a minor in creativity, and a class in creativity, art, and social transformation. And one of the things that we know about creativity, linking to your point, Dan, is that when people of very diverse points of view and background get together, that's one of the things that stimulates our creativity. And, in the eras of the world where people were most creative, for instance, during Shakespeare's era, in that time there were just all kinds of people, different immigrants coming into that region of the world, and people were speaking different languages. And the diversity there may be what gave rise to the enormous creativity of that moment in history, in that place. I was thrilled to read in the comments of some of the students in the class about their experiences being in these small groups, and how people realized that, you actually can come into a group with people of different backgrounds, older and younger in some cases. Those of us in the class and from the Heller School have different personal experiences with gentrification and with class in this country, and with different kinds of dynamics that often divide us, but that people were able to kind of see new ideas emerge from these conversations that no individual in the group could have developed together. And that was precisely my greatest hope for this assignment. Thanks. So, I'm really pleased with the quality of your presentations, and thanks everybody for coming. We'll take like a 5-minute break and then come back to finish up the class. Thank you, everybody.